Hello. Hello, 6 people watching. I know I've done the subject so many times, but I was asked to cover it again. And so I will, because it's, I suppose I feel it's my duty to go over things until people finally get them. And then, you think you've dealt with this subject so many times, and somebody says, "Why don't you do the subject?" And you think, "Oh, I thought you subscribed to my channel. I thought you liked it enough to seem to be a regular viewer." But I understand that my output is probably exceeds your time and attention span, and you don't listen to every word. And so I feel I should explain myself again. This thing about the separation of church and state. and this is actually a J question, so I suppose I could just give him the link, I suppose, but then it'll take such a long time, and yeah, do I need him to kind of interrupt me and is he really, does he really care? Is he just going through the motions of asking for the sake of attention? I mean, I have explained this to you, haven't I? So, why did the Americans separate the church from their state? Why, oh why, oh why would they do such a thing? Was it one of the reasons why the Christianity began its slow death? And when did it happen, and all these things? And I'm basically saying there was a lot of Christian on Christian religious persecution. Obviously in the old world, in the wars of the Reformation, and now I'm in some doubt when people, do they know about the wars of the Reformation? Perhaps not. I don't know what people learn these days, or I could be talking to somebody who was supposed to have covered this subject at school, but wasn't paying attention, or was truanting, and so has this gap in his knowledge. So the wars of the Reformation were basically a lot of individual European nations saying, well, why should we listen to you, Pope in Rome? We don't have to do anything you say if we don't want to. And the Pope would sort of sick the Spanish on the English, and European countries that felt happy being Catholic on the countries that wanted to be Protestant. So there was a lot of fighting going on, as you can imagine, and this led to a lot of ill feeling, and there was a lot of people being beheaded because they weren't quite on the right side at the time. Bloody Mary, who was the daughter of Henry VIII, would execute white Christian people who were not Catholic, and then when the Anglicans got into power, they would execute Catholics, and so it went on and on and on for about 150 years, I'm afraid, until the Protestant succession was secure, when William and Mary reigned after the Glorious Revolution. So this, in a nutshell, is what happened to the church as far as the English were concerned. So there'll be, their own different versions. I'm not exactly sure what went on in Germany, but I do remember learning about something called the Kulturkampf in Germany, and this is the German term for culture war, and of course it's being used even now. So the German culture war was basically the Prussian state saying, shut up, Pope, we don't want to hear your nonsense. And then the Pope fought back and said, I'm infallible now on matters of doctrine. So that was the act of papal infallibility in 1871, after the War of German Unification. So as you can see, the situation as regards Christendom in Europe was very complicated indeed, and before that there was the Holy Roman Empire, which we've been told was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, and I'm afraid I didn't study that when I was doing history at school. It was just something I only heard about, but the little I know is that it was a loose collection of dukedoms and principalities, and it was officially called an empire, going back to the days of Charlemagne. But obviously, in time people just wanted to do things their own way, and I guess what they tried to do, or the one in charge tried to do, was like, oh, would it be better if we just stay together, at least nominally, and then they would have a kind of elected king system, whereby they would just vote for each other in rotation. I'm not actually clear about it, but it's very complicated, and it wasn't anything I studied. And I remember asking Conhops about it, and he said he didn't do it at school either, so I don't really know. I'm sure you can find helpful little videos on YouTube about the Holy Roman Empire. But I guess that was kind of for show, really. And it's just evidence that, it was very, very hard to hold together, particularly when you wanted to call yourself an empire, and that, all the little bits and pieces of it just basically wanted to go their own way and didn't like you very much. So it was basically German. Because the rump of it was left in Austria, right? And Austria was already losing control because, there are all these German states, these German principalities, and they had a kind of free trade union called the Zollverein. So it's like, oh, we're all Germans, so why don't we just sort of trade with each other and have, special deals for each other for our import-export business? And they all said, yay, that sounds good, let's go in for it. And eventually they found themselves kind of rounded up and absorbed into the Prussian state. So it was a kind of fledgling EU kind of thing. So obviously at the time, Austria, it was called the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it was the big cheese of the time, except that, Prussia was just getting more and more powerful, and eventually it was led by, well, actually it wasn't led by Bismarck, but Bismarck was a mastermind behind the wars of German unification, and basically very cleverly picked one fight after another, one by one, until he won them all and Germany was unified. So basically he picked a war with Austria, and then he picked a war with France, and I think before he picked a war with Austria he picked a war with Denmark about the Schleswig-Holstein question, and I've forgotten, it's very complicated. But anyway, there was a lot of war, and before the wars of European, of national unification of various countries, like, Italy, there were the Napoleonic Wars. So it's like, it was always war in Europe. They just couldn't stop fighting each other, and you think, well, why were they such terrible people? Always fighting each other over the drop of a hat, about nothing at all. It's like, it's not an easy war that you can, work out what it's all about. It's like, well, why were they fighting? Who cares whether they're Catholic or Protestant? And it's because people don't care about religion. And this is another sign why Christianity is dead. Because, in the time when people cared about religion, they would go to war about each other. It's like, you're Catholic and I'm Protestant? well, I'll fight you, I'll behead you, I'll invade your country over that. And now people don't even know what it was all about. But ostensibly, of course, it was the idea that, oh, you're not loyal to your monarch, you're loyal to that Pope in Rome. So we can't trust you, so we're going to be mean to you until you get so angry about us being so mean to you that you decide to blow up the Houses of Parliament like what Guy Fawkes did. Or he tried. And then after that, Catholics were in very bad odour indeed. And there would be anti-Catholic riots, like the Gordon riots. So you can imagine that there was an awful lot of Christian on Christian religious persecution, and it wasn't very nice for anyone, really. I mean, when you think of, well, I'm not giving it to you in any kind of chronological order, but you may have heard of Charles, the king who lost his head when he really pissed everyone off. He married this French woman and she was Catholic, and that was the time between when the time when the Protestant succession was not yet secure. So it was, originally it was Catholic, Henry was Catholic, and then he decided to break with Rome because he was tired of the Pope telling him whom he could or couldn't marry. And then he said, well, screw you, Pope, I'm going to marry whoever I like, because I'm not going to leave my kingdom with a woman in charge. That would be the most terrible thing. And I'm not going to do that to my country, and I ain't going to let you, Pope, tell me that I can't marry again when you know my first wife, Catherine of Aragon, is not going to be able to give me children or either of the male or female sex because she was already 40. So that was why Henry broke with Rome. And then, over the next 150 years, it was just a bit of toing and froing and, a bit like, oh, Labour, Conservative. So people were all pretty triggered about the whole thing. And then, I was talking about Charles, who lost his head because he was sort of, although technically he was Anglican, it was like he was being a bit too Catholic for the liking of his people. And he was also a bit stubborn about things, and so he got into trouble with his nobles, and they didn't like the way he taxed them. Even wealthy people like barons and things, they got fed up with the king's taxes as well. So, they rebelled against him. And then there was the English Civil War, and he lost, and then he lost his head, and then Oliver Cromwell said, well, I'm not going to rule you as a king, but I will rule you as Lord Protector. And he did until he died, and then his son wasn't much good, and then the monarchy was restored, and everybody was happy again. But while Oliver Cromwell was in charge, he was a bit puritanical. So I guess this is what people who are not certain of their position do. It's like, well, I have to mind my P's and Q's. I have to be holier than thou, certainly holier than everyone else. So I'm going to work harder, and I'm going to, go the extra mile to prove how much better I am than the people I've just toppled. So this whole thing of the Protestant work ethic, where did it come from? And it was really the Protestants saying, well, we're better than you lazy, degenerate Catholics who, do all these corrupt deals with your priesthood and your Pope. well, we're going to really work hard and we're going to get lots of money and we're going to show you how much better we are than you. And that was really how the Protestant work ethic came into being. And then, of course, during the time of Cromwell, it took a harder turn. So the Puritans were known for people who cancelled Christmas, who said, theatres were corrupting influences and shouldn't be allowed. So it wasn't much fun to be a Puritan during Republican times in England. So when the monarchy was finally restored, the king was called the Merry Monarch. So that would be Charles II. Charles I lost his head. But you can imagine, that there would be such a lot of bad blood between all the different kinds of Christians, these Catholics against the Anglicans, and then the Puritans some more. So the Puritans were being persecuted, and they were looked at with great suspicion, probably with as great a suspicion as I guess most people now would look upon Muslims, like, ooh, they're all terrorists, they're all subversives, they don't like us, look what they did to us before, we don't like them, we'd like to, settle a few scores with them. So, some of you will know that the Pilgrim Fathers were Puritans, and they were persecuted from, I'm a bit hazy about the detail, but they thought they could find refuge in the Netherlands, and then they thought, no, Holland is going to turn bad. We have to go somewhere where they will never get us, and that would be, of course, a new world. And I know they were stuck at Plymouth for quite a bit because King James said, well, might not let them go, might put them in prison or do something mean to them. But anyway, eventually they managed to leave, and they arrived in Virginia, and of course a lot of people from Europe would arrive, seeking their fortune, and a few Quakers arrived, and then a few more of them arrived, and then they, surprise, surprise, there was bad blood between the Quakers and the Puritans, and they would kill each other. So things got really bad, and if you can imagine it, being the founding father of America, and you're thinking, I've got to keep a clean slate now. I can rewrite the rules. I mean, obviously there was lots of bad stuff going on in the old world, and we could easily fix that, and we'll just write the new rules in our constitution. Yay! And so they did. And then they thought, well, we're not going to have a Church of America because, knowing how people are, people who would be in the official, the national religion will just oppress all the others. So they're going to say, well, we're not going to have any main church. And that I think was the reason why the church was separated from the state by the Americans. Or you could say quarantined. So that was what Thomas Jefferson did. He drafted the First Amendment. And there was a precursor of that, I think it was called the Virginia Amendment. And of course it was Virginia where all the trouble started with the Quakers and things, and that resulted in the Salem witch trials. So white people, you have to remember that these were all white, English-speaking Christian people accusing each other of all kinds of things. And I think deep down, you sort of know. I mean, if you take the trouble of reading the Bible, particularly the New Testament, and you compare the Old Testament, well, the Torah anyway, or Leviticus and Deuteronomy, you don't have to like the rules, but you will know that, well, it's about rules. Those two books, it's all about rules, do's and don'ts. But if you look at the New Testament, who knows what they're going on about it? It's Paul's letter to the Corinthians, the Ephesians, the Romans, and and then there's 3 different versions, 3 or 4 different versions of what Christ did when he was alive, and so it's a very confusing narrative of what happened and what didn't. And of course, Revelations is about predictions of the future, but there's not really anything in the New Testament that you could base your theocracy on. I mean, you can go to the Sermon on the Mount, but you won't find that it says anything that you would like to base your theocracy on. So really, law in Europe was kind of based on the Old Testament, really, 10 Commandments and all that kind of thing. And I'm sure, even though the Christians shunned the Jews and whatever, they would think, well, which rules are for the Jews and which rules are for Gentiles? We know that Jews are forbidden to practice usury on each other, but they're allowed to practice usury on Gentiles. But we, being Gentiles, what's our position? What should we do? And for centuries they thought, no, we're going to treat ourselves like Jews, and we're not going to practice usury on each other. Because obviously, if Jews are allowed to practice it on the out-group but not allowed to practice it against each other, then obviously it's a bad thing. So we won't practice usury until John Calvin said, oh, maybe it's all right if we don't charge very high interest rates, just maybe 5%, nothing more than that, So that was when usury was introduced. I mean, people think, John Calvin, he was all about this tulip thing about, I don't even know what that was about. I've forgotten the term, but it's all about, I can't remember the word. Something about justifying by faith, and I've never worked it out. Anyway, I thought he was this great theologian, but then I found out that, he was the guy who said usury was okay. And that was really why they liked him so much. Because he kind of said, well, it's like, somebody saying, sex and drugs and rock and roll, it's all right, go right ahead, have fun. So the Americans separated their church from their state, and I think that was really the beginning of the end of the church. And in a way, you have to take a long look at things. So obviously it's not going to happen within a lifetime, so you don't really know. So you do need to take a historical perspective of all this. So this was a question Jay asked about church and state. Why not, unite them? I think, well, if you do unite them, it'll be a theocracy. So So Jay, without actually meaning to, finds himself saying, well, why don't we do all these things? Well, that would be a theocracy. And what kind of theocracy would you like? And of course, really the question is, you can only sensibly answer this question by looking at the rules. Like, well, how many theocracies can we choose from? And then I'll have to say, well, there's the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran. And you go, and then you say, well, what's wrong with the New Testament? And I'll say, well, there's nothing in the New Testament. Honestly, there's nothing. It's just stories. I don't say anything. You know, all the rules are in the Old Testament and the Quran. And I think if you're going to be sensible, if you're really going to have laws based on the supposedly divine word found in Scripture, you're just left with the Old Testament and the Quran. And you already know, it's for the Jews, right? The Old Testament, the Torah. And anyway, it's like, there's all sorts of unsuited, like, oh, you can't wear mixed fibres, and if you pick up sticks on the Sabbath, you're going to get it in the neck. The penalties are much, much harsher. Break the Sabbath, death penalty; idolatry, death penalty; blasphemy, death penalty. Well, you already know what Christ was crucified for, right? Blasphemy, because he said his papa was God. So it's all been affirmed anyway. And, you know, Christians have to say, well, mean old Jews, they crucified our Christ for blasphemy. And what's the nature of this blasphemy? Christ said his papa was God. But Islam, the Quran doesn't say execute idolaters or blasphemers. It doesn't say anything about stoning. It just says, well, execute people if the interests of justice require it, but try and forgive them. So I guess if you're being sensible, it's like, okay, you don't believe in God, but you're forced to choose between two theocracies. The most rational choice would be to choose the theocracy that is least restrictive, since you don't even believe in God. So that's why I think the choice is so obvious. But for some reason people can't see that. It's so frustrating. And then you think there's Jay cheeking me all this time, and then he sort of come full circle. It's like, why don't we have a theocracy? Why don't we have a union of church and state? And it's like, it's almost unbelievable that he asked me this question. So I think I've kind of got it all off my chest. I'll read a chat now. I see Jay's in the chat. No, Korean man, I wouldn't enjoy day-to-day life. I don't want to live in Singapore. It's a concrete jungle. I'd rather live here, really. But obviously, in an elevated state, when I'm thanked for all the helpful advice I've given to Westerners to save their civilization. Yes, Bandito, Iran is technically a theocracy. Well, I'm here. I guess I'm in the UK for a purpose. And I think my purpose is to save Western civilization. I would like to go to the US again. I just have this urge to visit every every state. Maybe drive across it if it's safe. I must say, I do feel a little wistful about New Zealand. A friend of mine, well, two friends of mine have gone there and come back. But Jen hates me. Okay, I've got to the end of the rude comments about me. And I'm not going to prolong this over much because I think I managed to stick to the point and I've come to the end of my little talk. So I hope it's been useful and I will play you out with a bit of music.